قديش متوقع انه في سيدي جوردن.
لا انت بتقدر تطلع اي وقت بدك لانه سمعت بيطولوا بس الشخص اللي جاي. Anyway,
please mute yourself. We are recording. Hello, everyone. Today's date is December 10, 2023. We are having a Israeli-Palestinian simulation. Today's guest is Rebecca Ruth Gold. We are proposing the creation of a common secular government for the people of Israel and Palestine, a democracy based on three branches of government: parliament, which will be the legislative branch, equal to Israelis and Palestinians, a executive branch, president and vice president, equal to the Palestinian and Israelis, and a judicial branch equal to the Israelis and the Palestinians. We are not proposing the dismantling of the Israeli or the Palestinian government. We are proposing the creation of a common federal government for the whole area known as from the river to the sea, which includes the area of Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, and Israel, which is approximately 14 million people. My name is Joseph Avasar. You could contact me at josephavassar@gmail.com. Our website is ipconfederation.org. And if you go there, you could read our Constitution in three languages: Arabic, Hebrew, and English. And you can also read the frequently asked questions relating to how this common government, federal government, will be created and how it will function in conjunction with the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. Today's guest is Rebecca Ruth Gold. Rebecca Ruth Gold is a distinguished professor of comparative poetics and global politics at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Her books include Erasing Palestine, Free Speech, and Palestinian Freedom, the Persian prison poem, Sovereignty and the Political Imagination, and Riders and Rebels, the Literature of Insurgency in the Caucasus. She has written on the challenges of defining anti-Semitism and respecting free speech for Prospect Magazine, Jacobin, Political Quarterly, and Middle East Eye, among other venues. We had many guests on these simulations in the last several years. Noam Chomsky appeared twice in our simulations, and he recorded a video in support of our formula for peace. But many of our guests have recorded videos in support of our formula or complementing our formula for peace. We had people that we invited, and you can see that have not joined, either refused or ignored our invitations, and we're always trying to get more people to join. Next week, December 17th, so pay attention. We usually have the simulations every 2 weeks, but because of the Christmas holiday, our next simulation will be on December 17th. We are demonstrating that a common federal government could, in fact, decide on a two-state solution if it decides that that's the best way to go. Personally, I am not favoring the two-state solution. However, since I'm acting as the president and I am the executive branch, not the legislative branch, the legislative can offer their own legislation, and we are demonstrating how a common federal government with an independent parliament could decide on two-state solution if in fact they vote for a two-state solution. So we will have three proposals for a two-state solution, one by Mona Ali Khalil, the other by Nasir Abushi, and the third one by Alon Burstein. And we will have each one of these individuals explain their vision for two states, and then we will vote on their vision for two states. On January 7th, we will have Professor Omer Bartov, who is a Holocaust and Genocide Studies professor at Brown University. And he also supports a different federal system or confederate system, and we will talk to him about that. On January 21st, we will have Hillel Schenker, who is the editor of the Palestine and Israel Journal, which is the only joint Israeli-Palestinian publication. And we invite people of every political persuasion regarding their views on Israel-Palestine. We want to stress test with every person our formula for peace. We anticipate that the simulation today will take 120 minutes. It is divided into segments. Each segment is approximately 5 to 10 minutes, and we will have Professor Gould speak at each segment, and then we will have a question and answer with Professor Gould, open discussion for the public, and then closing remarks. We have a video that explains our vision for peace. It takes about 2 minutes, and I would very much appreciate it if you can listen to it, because that's how we are going to do the simulation today, based on what this video says.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations, and instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed, and the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So we usually conduct a pre-simulation, and this is a simulation, it's not a lecture. Pre-simulation survey. I will ask you to vote right now, and then we will conduct a post-simulation survey. Do you support, at this time, before the simulation, do you support a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine to make peace? Please vote at this time. Okay, I'll give it another 10 seconds for people to vote.
Joseph, are all the simulations always at the 7 p.m. time in Israel? It's always the same time?
Yes, there is a change in time sometimes, but because of time change, but yes, it is the same time. Okay, so can you publish the votes, please? 29 out of 33 people who voted, which is 88%, voted yes. And 4 out of 33 people, which is 12%, voted no. And we will conduct the same simulation at the end of the same survey at the end of the simulation, and hopefully we'll see a change in the yes portion, or hopefully. All right. The purpose of the simulation, this is a simulation, it's not a lecture, is to demonstrate how a common federal government for Israel and Palestine could make peace. We are not the Israeli government or the Palestinian government. We do not support and claim to be taking their narrative. We do not support their narrative. We support our own narrative. The speaker that we have today, Rebecca Ruth Gold, is not a representative of the IPC. She was invited to stress test the IPC formula, to give us her opinion why she thinks it's a good idea or a bad idea. We will have a rigorous discussion, and we will respect each other during the discussion so that it's clear. We do not preclude other formulas for peace. We welcome other formulas for peace, and we are not claiming exclusivity. Like I said, we are encouraging competition on the question of peace. We will ask Professor Gould to be fair. We will ask her, could the IPC formula that is presented to her make peace? But we will ask her not to judge our plan based on perfection. There is nothing that can be perfect. But we will ask her to be fair and judge our formula based on what's the alternative. What is a better way to make peace other than what we are proposing? We will show legislation today that we think will be acceptable to both sides, meaning the Palestinian and the Israeli side. We are the side for everyone. We can show a lot more legislation than what we are going to show today, but because of time constraints, we can only show very few legislation. We ask you to look at the big picture. We ask you not to argue about technical issues. We are limited in time. Look at the big pictures and refrain from comments during the simulation. Questions are encouraged, but comments, we ask you to put in the chat or to reserve them to the end. This simulation is a model that mimics the operation of an existing or proposed system. And that's what we are doing today. It's not a lecture. If I show you an airplane and you say, well, how does this thing fly? That's a question. But if you say, well, airplanes cause pollution, that's a comment. I am asking you, please reserve your comments to the end or put them in the chat, because we want to demonstrate to you how a common federal government could work. And we would like to show you the whole picture, as much of a picture that we can show under the time constraints. In order to conduct the in order to conduct the simulation, we have to have certain assumptions. any organization, any formula for anything has assumptions. So these are the assumptions that we will ask you, the audience, to accept, and we will ask Professor Gould to accept as well. That we have just concluded an election, that we had $100 million were just spent on a year-long campaign promoting the elections. In other words, for the last 1 year, we were able to create the platform for the election. We were able to explain to the people of Israel and Palestine what it is, and we were able to respond to all the questions and all the negative assumptions that are being made against the election by the governments of Israel, the Palestinian, by the people, by those who are against a federal government. So assume that we were able to spend $100 million and we were able to recruit parliament members or parliament candidates and a candidate for president and vice president in the 1 year, and we just concluded a 3-month election. In other words, we started spending the money a year ago, and we started the election 3 months ago, and today we concluded the election. So we want you to assume that 14 million people were permitted or were given the right to vote. We want you to assume, and Professor Gould, we want you to assume that as well, that 5 million people voted. We want you to assume that 3 million Palestinians voted and 2 million Israelis voted. We want you to assume that the president received 1.5 million votes. I want you to assume that I, Joseph, was elected president. I never intend to be president. It's not my goal to be president, but for the purpose of the simulation, it makes it easier for me to speak as if I am elected president. So from now on, I am going to act as if I am the president. I also want you to assume that 300 parliament members were elected. And by the way, a Palestinian lady received 1.3 million votes. She is going to be the vice president, and she and I will rotate in 2 years. In 2 years, I will become vice president, and she will be the president. But we both have constitutional duties during our terms, during our 4-year service. So like I said, we want you to assume that 300 parliament members were elected. Some of them are Palestinians, some of them are Israelis, but 300 were elected representing 300 districts. Each district has 47,000 people represented by one person. Professor Gould, do you have any, well, let me ask the audience first, and then I'll go to Professor Gould. Do you have any questions, not comments, but questions regarding these assumptions? The audience, please. Does anyone have any questions regarding those assumptions? Speak up. Okay, I hear no questions. Let's go to Professor Gould. You are allowed to make comments and questions.
Okay, I have a simple question and then maybe a more complex comment. Questions are just, I think someone else is asking this in the comments, the numbers, is this the current population of, it looks like just Israel, not the West Bank or Gaza, right? Is that what when you're saying Palestinians?
No, I believe that the area of Israel, the West Bank and Gaza is 14 million people total.
Right. So, okay, so sorry, but then it says 5 million. Oh, so only 5 million vote out of 14, because that's, and how many would be eligible, or is that?
Well,
the numbers.
They are all eligible with the exception of minors.
Exactly, so that's 5 million.
So really 10 million, approximately 10 million are eligible.
Okay, so half, which isn't, okay. One comment would be that's not the best turnout. I mean, 50%. Hopefully it'd be great if there could be a higher turnout, but that's realistic. I think that actually reminds me of the US elections. US presidential elections are usually about that number. But I think of really, so this is just, obviously, these are just hypothetical remarks, but I think a really strong democracy would have a higher turnout, although the reality is that most democracies don't. So that's just worth noting. I have another thought, which is maybe more historical. Is this the time for like extensive comments, or you just want like, yeah, is that I can go on, but I just don't know what's
okay.
what's
You are our guest. You are
Okay.
allowed to make comments and ask questions.
okay.
The rest of the people are only allowed to ask
Sure.
questions.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I mean, the bigger comment, I mean, I think it looks like a very exciting proposition that's definitely worth, taking seriously. I guess the question is to get to this stage of everyone having a kind of equal vote and the options, for what's on the ballot to be kind of equal and fair. It seems to me that would, so to get to the stage of where we reach this scenario, which I think is a good scenario to be in, it's a good situation that we want, I voted yes, I certainly support, these propositions, but I guess the problem is that it involves more than just Israelis and Palestinians. I mean, there's a reason why what's going on right now in Gaza is a kind of international conflict, right? Many countries, particularly the US and Europe, kind of have a stake. So I think there's a question of getting those countries to also, I'd just be interested to hear more about that. Yeah, how to get them to agree.
We are proposing an election for the people of Israel and Palestine.
Sure.
We are ignoring the whole world. We are ignoring the Israeli government and the Palestinian government. We are the people of Israel and Palestine deciding on our own to have an election. And we were able to obtain $100 million to explain what our concept is. And my question to you, Professor, are these assumptions, in your opinion, realistic if we are able to spend $100 million to reach those assumptions?
Well, I think I would just continue with the point I was making. I mean, I think if the state of Israel itself was founded by international, collaborations for other countries. So the idea of just ignoring, the rest of the world, I don't know how far that would go in the world we live in. But nonetheless, that shouldn't stop local initiatives. So yes, I think it's a good thing, good assumption to go with. I think there would be various international actors that might make things difficult, unfortunately. But are
you aware that we are speaking about online elections?
Okay. Sure. But I guess yes. I mean, that does simplify it. That's a good initiative. I support that. I think that helps. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it solves the problem. I mean, at the end of the day, I think the international community, meaning mostly the US and Europe, are going to want to have a say in all of this, unfortunately, right? They're not going to allow Israelis and Palestinians to create democracy. I think that's what history tells us. But
how would they prevent it?
They would, well, I mean, just look at history. Every democratic leader that's come up in Africa and the Middle East they've found ways, right, to prevent, sometimes through military force, sometimes by persuading, by having their own sort of media campaigns about discrediting certain kinds of leaders. I mean, but that doesn't mean I'm not trying to say let's not even try. I'm just saying that we should be prepared for that too. I think if we to move forward with this.
Okay, all right, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions, not comments, questions, please, regarding these assumptions? Because this is the foundation of our simulation today. Okay, hearing no questions. I think that this is a realistic scenario if we spend $100 million. I just want to, I should have updated this. The war between Israel and Gaza cost $3 billion with the B a week. And I think that $100 million could actually make peace and could make this federal government a reality. So now, because this is a simulation, I'm going to be asking you, the audience, to act as parliament members. Remember, the simulation assumes that I was elected president. Now I'm asking you to choose if you are a Palestinian parliament member or an Israeli parliament member. And I'll show you a map of Israel, Palestine, and I'll ask you to decide and vote. Right now, I need you to vote. If you are so you're really not voting, you're just identifying yourself as a Palestinian parliament member. So I want you to, those who choose to be Palestinian members, parliament members, please vote. So we want to see how many Palestinian parliament members we have. Palestinian parliament. And I'm asking you to remain Palestinian members throughout the simulation. And I'm also asking you to be intellectually honest and to identify the districts that you are representing. A lot of the districts could be mixed districts. In other words, Palestinians and Israelis together. Okay, so could you publish the vote? We have 18 Palestinian parliament members. And let's go to Israeli Palestinian parliament member. Those of you who are identifying yourself as Israeli parliament members, or please vote. So we need to see how many we have Israeli parliament members. And Professor Gould, you can also choose to be either Israeli or Palestinian parliament members if you
Great.
so choose. Okay, please publish the vote. We have 16 Israeli parliament members. So we have 18 parliament members, Palestinian, and 16. And please remain in your capacity, Israeli or Palestinian, and think in your mind what area in this map you're representing, because you may be asked, what area do you represent? Okay, I just want to respond to some of what Professor Gould said. I don't think they have a reason to object, the Israeli or the Palestinian or the American government or the world government. They cannot really have a good articulable reason to object, because they fail to give us peace and they support democracy. So they would not be able to articulate a reason, and they haven't done so in the past. We had an election on December 12, 2012. We had a New York Times ad, and no one objected. Although it was very few people knew about it, and that's why I said we need to have $100 million, which would trigger those governments and those people that are interested in opposing that to be more vocal. All right. Now that before I go on, I need to have someone acting as Israeli Prime Minister. Do I have a volunteer for Israeli Prime Minister in this simulation? Is anyone willing to be Israeli Prime Minister in this simulation? Please, just speak up. Israeli Prime Minister. And I need a Palestinian president. Okay, who is the Israeli Prime Minister?
If nobody is objects, I can.
Okay, Giacomo. And
I will go for the Palestinian president.
Okay, Saeed. Okay, great. All right. So now that we have a parliament, we elected parliament members, we have a president, vice president. Our first order of business is to pass a constitution. And we have to ratify the constitution. Like I said, the full constitution is on our website. This is a short version of the constitution, and we're going to ratify the short version of the constitution. Charles, are you here? Can you read it out, please? Okay, I'll read.
We
it.
believe, excuse
Yeah,
me.
go ahead.
We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges, with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
All right, thank you. So the important part is that we do not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli government. So constitutionally, we cannot abrogate, we cannot undermine any agreements between those governments. They can agree to two states, they can agree to one state, they can agree to whatever it is they want to agree. If they reach an agreement, constitutionally, we are prohibited from undermining those agreements. If we pass legislation that infringes on the sovereignty of the government of Israel or Palestine, then we give them a veto power. If our legislation does not infringe on their sovereignty, we do not give them a veto power. But if they veto the legislation, then it's not going to pass. If they don't veto the legislation, it will be the law of the land. We are the only legitimate government in Israel, Palestine, and therefore we will be enforcing the law of the land once it is not vetoed and once it is passed. Let me go to the audience first before I go to Professor Gould. Does anyone have any questions? Questions, not comments, questions regarding the Constitution? Okay, hearing no questions. Professor Gould, do you have any questions or comments regarding this Constitution?
It looks like, I mean, a model constitution in many respects. I mean, equality is at its foundation. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just continue my thought, if maybe precisely because we have this, we the people, so obviously the US Constitution is at the background of this Constitution. And I just to clarify, when I say that, you know, that the US might prevent something like this from happening, I'm not saying that they would have a good reason to do that, right? I'm not saying that they would have, I'm saying they would have a bad reason to do that. You know, my other book is on Iran, so I'm very much thinking about sort of the coup in 1953, right? So there was a democratic leader, and the U.S. decided that was not in their interests. So that's just to clarify, like what I'm saying. That they wouldn't have good reasons, but they might have bad reasons, and they might, yeah. But as far as the sort of text of the Constitution goes, I mean, I think, it seems to be to pass the test in terms of equality, which is important. Okay,
and what about the safeguards that we are giving to the Israeli and the Palestinian people, which basically says if your governments decide on two states or one state, we are fine with that. We cannot abrogate and also we give you a veto power if it violates your sovereignty.
I think that makes sense. I mean, some of this debate about like one state versus two state, it overlooks the fact that it's not, it's sort of, what's the word? It's a technical issue, really, not a deal breaker, because because there can be two states within a single state, right? And that may work better. Yeah, so I think that the veto power is a good one. I guess the question would be, what if it does become two states? What happens to the minorities in each of those? How are their rights, protected in each of those states?
Well, we are the government of the whole area, regardless of whether there is two state or one state. The minorities will be represented by their parliament members. There are parliament members in 300 districts, and each district will be represented by a parliament member. So all of the districts will be represented by 300 parliament members. Now, the Israeli and the Palestinian government will continue to exist, but we are
the overarching
300 parliament members representing the people of Israel and Palestine.
So in some cases, that would mean that the representative would not share, which is fine, but just to clarify, it means that the representative would not necessarily have the same, sometimes there may be a Palestinian representative for an Israeli citizen. Is that the case?
Correct. Many of the districts will be mixed districts, yes. It's just like, you can have a district that is mostly Republican or Democrat, but they vote for each other. All right, let's go to the parliament members to ratify the Constitution. Now, since you are a parliament member, you must ratify the Constitution. If you do not ratify the Constitution, you will be expelled and you will not be able to vote on legislation because you are a parliament member. You have been elected and you have expressed your interest to be a parliament member under this Constitution. So now you need to ratify it. Okay, so let's go to the Palestinian parliament members. Please vote to ratify the Constitution.
Saeed, there's a question.
And by the way, this Constitution is not subject to a veto power. It does not affect the sovereignty of Israel or Palestine, of the Palestinian government. Okay, publish the vote, share the results. Okay, so 95%, one Palestinian parliament members voted no. That means he does not accept the Constitution and he's therefore expelled from the parliament, he or she. And whoever gets the second number of votes from his or her district will be automatically parliament members. So the person who voted no, you are not allowed to vote on any of the legislations that are coming up. All right, let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please ratify the.
Did you warn the Palestinian ones beforehand?
I warned everyone that they must ratify the Constitution. They were elected they were aware of the Constitution, and they campaigned that they want to be in the parliament, and now they are voting against the Constitution, so therefore they are expelled because they did not fulfill their obligation to the people of Israel and Palestine. Okay, publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted. So we have a Constitution. Congratulations. This is a very important event in the history of humanity. We never had a Constitution. We never had a parliament and a legitimate government in Israel, Palestine. And really, it's a momentous event in history. All right. Let's go to our first legislation, and that's granting a veto power to the separate governments. Libby is not with us today, so Charles, can you read this part?
Granting a veto power to the separate governments. The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments and are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision for peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian government on issues in which it is indispensable. In the event of changes in governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed. The Parliament will decide on indispensability. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively.
All right, before I go to Professor Gould, does anyone in the audience have any questions regarding the veto power legislation?
Said still has his hand up. I don't know whether that's just because he didn't lower it.
Said, you have a question regarding this veto power?
Not this, but not this for the veto power. I was gonna ask the doctor question. Is she mentioned twice that the American not gonna agree with it. Do you ever see the Palestinian and Israeli ever came together face to face? The people. My question is: we are bringing this new thing to bring the Palestinian and Israelis together where they can come with an agreement, because every time we go to America and Saudi Arabia and everybody else, this is where we get lost and nobody reach peace until now after 75 years of conflict. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll reserve that for the comments. Does the professor, do you have any comments or questions regarding this veto power legislation?
I think it looks very well designed. Yeah, I don't have any criticisms. Just could I respond to the comment that was just made by Said, or?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, I hope, just to be clear, I'm not advocating American involvement. I'm just someone who's looked at, world history for the past 100 years and is thinking about who has the largest army, who can impose its will, on the world. It seems like that America is that country, and they're not. I was myself surprised, with the Biden's sort of interventionist approach, right? They don't seem to be removing themselves from the situation. I think it would definitely be better for Palestinians. I have no doubt about that. If they would, I'm just obviously interested in the reality, right? So I think I agree with you, Said. That was just to clarify my perspective. But I think it looks well designed.
All right, let's go to Benjamin Ben Baruch. You have a question regarding this veto legislation.
Yeah, I'm not clear on this issue of how is it decided that the issue is indispensable, and how can it be? And if there's disagreement on that, where does the final decision making lie?
Okay, so really it goes to the question of sovereignty. How do we define sovereignty, and what makes it what makes the veto indispensable? We decide that. We are the common government. So if we want to implement legislation, then we look to see whether the Israeli or the Palestinian government could block us from implementing the legislation. If they could block us, then they become indispensable. And if they are indispensable, we give them a veto power. All right, let's go to voting. Palestinian parliament members, please vote on this legislation. Okay. One more second, 2 seconds. Let's publish the vote. 93% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Okay, and the polling published the results. 85% of the Israeli parliament members voted on this legislation. So congratulations, it passed. And again, the Israeli and the Palestinian governments do not have a veto power over this legislation to give them a veto power. We are the one who decide whether or not to give them a veto power based on the criteria that Mr. Ben Baruch asked and I responded to. All right. Let's go to the first legislation in which the Israeli and the Palestinian parliament members do, the Israeli and the Palestinian government will have a veto power. This is a 2-page legislation. Charles, could you please read it out?
Rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel. The IPC is the only government in Israel and Palestine that was legitimately elected by the entire population. The IPC elected 300 parliament members in Israel and Palestine, with approximately 125 of them being elected by the people of Gaza and the Southern Israel area near the Gaza-Israel border. Over 5 million people in Gaza and Israel are directly and personally affected by the violence that has occurred since the events of October 7th and beyond. Thousands of homes, roads, and infrastructure buildings, including hospitals, have been destroyed. Law and order and civil society have been destroyed in Gaza and Southern Israel. It is unlikely that the Israeli and Palestinian governments will be able to restore normal, peaceful existence to the area in Gaza and Southern Israel in the foreseeable future. The future of the people of Gaza and Israel is interconnected. The IPC Parliament is obligated to the well-being of all the people in Israel and Gaza, including those constituents who were displaced from their homes in Gaza and Israel. The IPC is committed to rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel and ensuring the immediate return of all the people in Gaza and Southern Israel to their homes. The IPC is calling for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Gaza. The IPC is calling for the immediate return of all political hostages and prisoners to their respective jurisdictions. The IPC is calling for the rebuilding of Gaza and Southern Israel by requesting $50 billion grant from the world community, including the Israeli and Palestinian governments, to aid in the rebuilding of the areas in Gaza and Southern Israel affected by the devastation. The IPC will remain the legitimate government in Israel and Palestine with jurisdiction in Gaza while providing veto power to the Israeli and Palestinian governments on matters that affect their sovereignty. The Israeli and Palestinian governments are bestowed a veto power over this legislation.
All right, thank you, Charles. Let's go to the audience first and then to Professor Gould. Do you have any questions regarding this legislation? Audience, do you have any questions? All right, hearing no questions, let's go to Professor Gould. Oh, okay, Una. Una, please ask your question.
Okay, sorry. First of all, good evening, everybody, and a happy Chanukah. Yes, am I saying the right thing?
Hanukkah, yes.
Hanukkah, sorry, yes. Now, my question is, I'm looking at the amount of money, $50 billion grant. Very nice, very generous, but who will have the more money? Don't you think Gaza should have most of the money because Gaza has been destroyed? Therefore, how would you allocate the amount of money to be fair?
Okay, excellent question. I do think that Gaza deserves more because it looks like the devastation is a lot more in Gaza. But we will utilize the services of appraisers from the objective appraisers, and then we will allocate the money based on proportionate damage done to the people of Gaza, the area of Gaza and Southern Israel.
Second question as well, and then I finish. Do you think USA will allow you to do all that?
I do, and we are going to be asking them to contribute a substantial amount of money, and I don't think that they will have the political power or political will to oppose this.
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph. And you're doing a great job. Well done. Keep going.
Thank you. Any other questions? I saw some hand raised.
Yeah, I have a question. I wanted to confirm that the bit about releasing hostages and political prisoners refers to all Palestinian political prisoners who are held without charge.
Yeah, those are all political prisoners. We are not speaking about those that were convicted in court for crimes that are not related to the conflict. And if there is an issue whether that crime is related to the conflict, whether it is a political, a person is a political prisoner, we have judges, Palestinians and Israeli judges, and they will decide whether the specific political prisoners. But I think there is a consensus of who is a political prisoner. But if there is no consensus regarding specific individuals, it will be submitted to the IPC judges, and both sides will have the power to appeal to their own government, to their own judicial system. Any other questions? Okay, Professor Gould, you can make comments and ask questions.
So great. So I think this is a very important initiative. I think the first thing that drew my attention was what's already been mentioned, the $50 billion request, grant requested from the world community. So I just looked up the budget for the UN, the United Nations, and according to just what I found online, it's 3.4 billion. So that's just to put this in context, 50 billion. I mean, that may be what's needed, but it is certainly a very large amount of money. So I guess my question would be, what if the world powers say no? And second, it says it's a grant. So does that mean the money would be returned at some point? I guess I just have some questions about that amount.
No, the money, it's a grant. The money will not be returned. Okay. Remember, I was elected the president by 1.5 million votes. I will be going around the world and make personal appeal to most countries and their president and put them on the spot and demand that they will contribute some money, because a lot of them are contributing weapons. And if they do not contribute money for peace, I will put them on the spot.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then also just another maybe point about what I've seen so far in general. What hasn't been mentioned, I think, maybe could be part of this legislation. The question of borders, and particularly like the open and close. You know, the way that things are so complete. Gaza is completely cut off. The West Bank as well. That just might be useful to put some of that into the legislation as well about repealing those borders.
We don't want to do that because we don't want to. We are not in favor of borders. Good. We represent the people of Israel and Palestine, 14 million people. If Israel and Palestine agree on borders, we have no choice. If our parliament decides on borders, we have no choice. But I am the president of the whole area. I do not want borders between my people. So I will personally be against a border. But if my parliament decides to have a border, then I have no choice.
But I think we know most Palestinian leaders would not support that. So I guess is what is there if Palestinians support that and then the Israelis oppose, what happens? What are the means available to Palestinian leaders for opening the borders?
If one side vetoed the legislation, it doesn't pass.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I saw other questions raised, questions, not comments. But in the meantime, we can have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation. Palestinian parliament members, do you agree with this legislation? Palestinian parliament members only. Okay. Please publish the vote. 92% of the Palestinian parliament members agreed with this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Israeli parliament members. Publish the votes. Okay. 92% of the Israeli parliament members passed the legislation. Let's go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
Yes, I am vetoing this legislation. However, I am open to a negotiated position with talking with IPC members to amend this. And I see a role for the IPC in conducting future negotiations with Palestinian authorities to provide a longer-term settlement about surrounding Gaza and its reconstruction.
What amendments are you asking for?
I want this resolution to not mention anything about a ceasefire, since this is a security issue that cannot be dealt with in such a context.
Well, but you want the rebuilding of Gaza and Israel, correct?
Indeed.
So how are you going to do that without ceasefire?
A ceasefire is a premature thing right now. I think the resolution could be passed without talking about that to speed things up.
My understanding is that you anticipate ending this war at the beginning of January.
This is covered by our decisions that will be made at the appropriate time.
Okay, so if this legislation will take effect at the end of January, will you agree to that?
I think it's not a question of the time when it can take effect. Reconstruction is a very long-term issue, and instead ceasefire is an imminent issue which will be hampered actually if we included it in such legislation. I think it would because of cross vetoes and issues like that. So I think that for the sake of starting a process for reconstruction immediately, we should take that one out and discuss instead a ceasefire whenever it is appropriate. But it will be up to our IDF, our decisions on how to appropriately approach that issue.
Okay, Mr. Prime Minister, a large number of the people in Israel want a ceasefire. The whole world is asking for a ceasefire. You're not elected in Gaza. You do not have legitimacy in Gaza. I am the president of the whole area, including Gaza. The issue of having a ceasefire in Gaza is supreme to me because I represent the people in Gaza. I can tell you that should you not agree to this legislation, I will personally campaign against you within the Israeli political system to remove you as prime minister because you are not a person of peace and you're harming the people of Israel and Gaza, in my opinion. So are you going to change your mind on this legislation?
No, I am not, but I respect your decision to run against me, and I would welcome the challenge.
No, I'm not running against you. I am in a separate government, but I will campaign against you and I will show the whole world, and including the people of Israel, that you are harming the people of Israel because you are a warmonger and you want to continue with wars, even though there is a good understanding by the people of Israel and Gaza and the parliament members that we want this thing over. We want to rebuild, and we want to rebuild Israel and Gaza.
Allow me, however, to point out that by refusing to amend your resolution, you are holding up the process of rebuilding Gaza. And money, international money, is not easy to come by nowadays because Europe usually chips in quite a lot, but they've got the war in Ukraine.
Okay.
They're going to probably give a lot of money to the Ukrainians. We need to secure funding as soon as possible.
Okay,
And
what
I
part,
think that
what
you are
part do
holding
you,
things up.
maybe I didn't understand you. What part do you want me to amend?
To remove the call for a ceasefire.
Okay, let's go to the Palestinian president. Mr. President, are you going to agree with the prime minister to remove the area of ceasefire?
I disagree, and I believe the first thing we have to do if we are looking for peace is bringing ceasefire to the effect, because this is not harming the T group or the H group, Hamas group, who you, as Prime Minister of Israel, brought money from Qatar to Tel Aviv airport and escorted to Hamas to strengthen against the PA. So instead of you supporting more fire, you need to stop it so we can save the loss of civilians and to get as much Palestinians to agree with peace, because by not supporting the ceasefire, you are bringing more suffering and more destruction, and more people will be away from peace. So ceasefire immediately.
All right, so look, the idea is to demonstrate how legislation could pass or not pass, where it's not the idea is not to get the prime minister to change his mind. So I'm going to go to the next legislation unless the professor has some comments to make regarding what you have just seen.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Why not? First of all, why wouldn't be discussed the ceasefire and to maybe try to convince the prime minister that what is going on right now, for example, is a war crime, is a crime against humanity day by day by day. Every day, it's another crime. So just for the prime minister to know that this is accumulated, and at some point, the whole world look at what is going on. The whole world, not the governments necessarily, because they have their madness or whatever, but look at all the.
No, but that's not a question. That's a comment.
So
the purpose is to demonstrate how the process will work. It's not really the purpose is not to speak in favor of Israel or the Palestinian. It's to show how a federal government could work. Now, in reality, we can put a lot more pressure on Israel if necessary.
No, we can change the language, and we will put in the. I'm wondering why not changing the language, not just stop the ceasefire, not just ceasefire.
Okay.
Stop the language. No change. No, I'm asking why can't we change the language?
Okay, tell me what language to put.
Okay, to say stop the war crimes, stop the siege. Just take off the siege, and why won't we add this to this resolution, so it will be clear what we are for? This is not just a ceasefire.
Look, the likelihood that the prime minister will agree to that change of language is not, it's not likely. All right, let's go to the next, ending the current crisis. So this legislation passed the parliament, but was vetoed. The previous legislation was vetoed by the Israeli prime minister. But I think that in reality, we could put a lot more pressure on the prime minister. But let's go to ending the current crisis. Charles, can you read this legislation, please? Well, you know what, that legislation is actually similar. The prime minister is going to, let's go to this legislation, make peace with Iran, Lebanon, and Syria. All right, let me read it.
I can read it. I can read it if you want.
Okay, Sharon, yeah, please.
Okay, make peace with Iran, Lebanon, and Syria. We are the parliament members of the federal government of Israel, Palestine. We are the only legitimate government in the region. Our people have experienced wars and violence for over 100 years. The Israeli and Palestinian governments have failed to bring peace to the people in Israel/Palestine. Therefore, we are taking the initiative to protect all the people in Israel/Palestine and provide them with peace. To achieve this, we are forming our own delegations to directly meet with the authorities in Israel, Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, and Iran for the purpose of making peace in the region. Our intention is to demand that all these governments and entities agree to cease violence and threats against each other and work towards a lasting peace. Our goal is to be fair and objective and to expose any governments or entities that pose a threat to our people.
All right, so again, this legislation is not subject to a veto. We are the government. We are the parliament. We are the people who live in Israel, Palestine, and we do not want to have more wars, and we do not want to have more killing and more violence against our people. We are the only legitimate government in that area. So we are proposing this legislation to the parliament. Does the people in the audience, do you have questions regarding this legislation? Two participants raised their hands, but I don't see who, so please ask the questions. Just
Can I ask you, this is Peter. Can I ask you, why are you saying that we are the only legitimate government in the region? What do you mean by region?
The region is, like I explained before, it's Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem, from the river to the sea.
Because if you say the region, it could mean a much larger region.
I defined the region earlier.
Okay.
Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and West Jerusalem, from the river to the sea. Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Benji.
Yeah, hi, Benji.
What happens if we send a peace delegation while one of the governments, and it would be Israel, obviously, decided to wage war against Lebanon or Syria, or wage attacks against Lebanon and Syria, which haven't really stopped for decades?
Okay, we are sending delegation to specifically Lebanon to speak with the elements in Lebanon, whether it's the government, whether it's Hezbollah, and to ask them what are the real issues that they have with our country, and how can we make peace? We want to explore the issues, and then we go back to the Israeli government and explore the issues as well. They can rage a war against each other, but we want to prevent the war, and we want to expose those governments, whether it's the Israeli government or the Lebanese or Hezbollah. We want to expose them and to show that they are acting against our own people, who are Christian, Muslim, and Jews. Any other question? Okay, Professor Gould, do you have any comments? Okay, General, okay, go ahead, ask the question.
I was expecting you to have this legislation be vulnerable to a veto by the other governments.
Well, it's not. We want to go regardless of whether they agree or not. We are not. We are the legitimate government of Israel, Palestine.
Okay.
If they veto us, we can still go. They cannot block us from going. Any other question?
Joseph.
Yes. Sean, yes.
Okay. The peace with Syria, just one thing. There's that land that was from Syria, the Golan Heights. I don't know if they'll have peace with Syria if Israel won't give back the Golan Heights to Syria. I don't know if they're going to make peace or not, or maybe there's an alternative. Well, what do you think?
Well, I want to go to Syria and speak to the government of Syria. I want to have a delegation, Palestinians, Israelis, Jews, Christian, and Muslim, and I want to talk to Syria. This is all it is. It's not really, it's not anything unusual. We want to talk. We are the people. We are the people who will be injured and killed if there is a war. And we have the right to demand that our lives will be secured. And we don't think that the Israeli or the Syrian governments or any of these governments are securing our lives. And we want to get to the bottom of this.
But Joseph, if you let me, if possible, if I could,
Ask questions, please. Don't.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll vote on that.
okay.
All right. Okay, Professor, do you have any questions or comments? You are the only one allowed to make comments.
Sorry, I did have a question.
Yeah, Afshan, go ahead.
Thank you. Given the status between Israel, Hamas, and Hezbollah, are we to assume that these talks would actually go forward? Because it would take an effort to even be able to form a delegation to go there or have any type of discussion with them.
Okay, the delegation is our delegation of our parliament members, not the Israeli government, not the Palestinian government, our government. We are a separate and independent government. And we want to show up in Beirut and rent a conference room and invite the Lebanese government and the Hezbollah government to come and talk to us. That's all we're asking.
It's a great movement if it works.
It will work. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, could I make a technical comment? It's usually in diplomacy, a parliamentary delegation like the one we're envisaging here would be talking to elected representatives of respective countries. So they will go to Lebanon. They would not talk to the government of Lebanon, but they would talk to members of the Lebanese parliament, probably a delegation that the parliament appointed on purpose for that purpose.
Yeah, well,
and
look,
that
that's a technical, yes.
Well, no, because as for instance, in my position as Israeli prime minister, I would actually welcome such informal and contacts on the side. And I'm happy that I don't have to veto this because it contains things that officially I could not support. So that kind of initiative would be very welcome, I think, for an Israeli government.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's have, I saw Benji ask.
Yeah, I still don't understand what it means for a government that does not have control over the army that is waging war to negotiate peace when we have no ability to control that army or what it does.
Well, it means that we have the political power given to us by the people of Israel and Palestine to demand and to demonstrate to the whole world that there is a path to peace. The army is a tool for the Israeli government, but that tool does not necessarily have to be utilized if we are able to block the Israeli government from utilizing it. Okay, other people to raise their hands. Please ask the question.
I see Todd.
Todd, go ahead, Todd. Ask the question.
Nasir and Tony.
So my question is, how do we expect, we've got a captive peoples, and that's the Palestinians. They're captive because there's military control over them, martial law or occupation law, if you want to call it that. So how do we expect that they can overcome the inherent grievances that they're going to have because of the routine brutalization, repression, etc., when the oppressor, the occupier, is in a constant state of war against them because that's what occupation law is?
Well, we expect the parliament members, look, we just elected 300 parliament members. We are over that part, okay? We are an independent and separate government from the people of Israel and Palestine. We understand that there is a problem between Israel and Palestine, but we are an independent, separate government. We have elected the people of Israel and Palestine, and our job is to make peace. And we have a lot of tools at our disposal, many legislation. And like I said at the beginning, this is the tip of the iceberg. We have many legislations to make peace. This is just one of them. Any other question?
Yeah, Joseph, my question is that, is the purpose of this legislation, because the reason why it can be confusing is that it's not a replacement for making peace with these countries, but rather it's sort of a way to establish back channels to facilitate actual treaties with the government of Israel and the government of Palestine with these countries. I think if it was presented in that way, to say that rather the Confederation makes relations with Iran, with Lebanon, with Syria, for the purpose of fostering an eventual treaty of peace with Israel or with Palestine. And I think if it's taken, because the way it looks now, it's saying that they are going to make peace on behalf of Israel and Palestine with Iran, Lebanon, and Syria, rather than be sort of a back channels, a sort of a facilitator of peace between countries in the region.
Okay, maybe that's the way I presented it. I agree that I needed to present it in the most extreme way so that you understand. But I think that you are correct. So what language do you want me to change here? It says our intention is to demand that all these governments and entities agree to a ceasefire, to cease violence and threat against each other and work towards a long-lasting peace. Do you want me to add and enter into a treaty?
For example, it says our intention is to demand that these governments agree to a ceasefire and threat each other and
Cease
to act
violence,
as cease violence. Oh, cease violence, and it just got really small. I'm sorry. And threat each other against each other, and to work as a facilitator of peace between between Israel, Palestine, and the other countries, as a facilitator or as a go-to or a promoter, maybe. Facilitator and promoter of peace between Israel, Palestine, and these countries.
Did I put of peace treaties?
Facilitator and promoter of peace between these countries. Because this will take it away, because we are stepping into the authority of these governments by saying that we don't want to say we're going to go make a treaty for you guys. Yeah. So, for example, if Israel or Palestine wants to make peace with Iran, we have the establishment, we have the relations established. They can come to us, and we can sort of move it along faster since we have this network already opened.
All right. Any other comments? Any other questions, please? Not comments.
Tony has his hand up for a long time.
Okay, Tony.
Yeah. So is the kind of the theory of this for you, Joseph, that if this is a voting bloc, the mandate from that many people, that if the Palestinian or Israeli governments started to oppose something like that, really we would have the mandate from the voting bloc that they would really end up undermining their own government, and so there would be a lot of pressure on them to comply. Is that kind of the way you see this?
Exactly. All right, let's, Professor, do you have any questions or comments regarding this legislation?
I think a lot of the comments that have been made have helped to kind of clarify some of the issues. I think a point was made about controlling the army, and it appears that there is no army under this government's control. So that's just worth noting. I mean, I could see a world in which a better armed political party would want to crush these efforts at, regardless of the fact that it has a democratic mandate. So I just wonder what's the kind of protection from that happening. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's a good initiative. I think the point that was made about Syria, the distinctiveness of the Syrian situation with the Golan Heights, is an important one. So I'd be a little bit more kind of, there's a bigger barrier there, right? And that needs to be acknowledged somehow. But otherwise, yeah, it's a good beginning.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote. Palestinian parliament members. Publish the votes. 14 out of 14. We started with 18, but that's okay. 100% voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Israeli parliament members, please vote. Publish the votes. 93% of the Israeli parliament members voted in this for this legislation. So terrific. Now let's conduct a post-simulation survey. After participating in the simulation, do you support? So this is for everyone to vote. After you've participated, do you support a common government? Okay, publish the votes, please. 26 out of 27 voted yes. That's 96%. 4% voted no. Only one person voted no. 96% yes. So we started with 88%. It went up to 96%. So that's pretty good. This is just one simulation, and there is a change in opinion here. All right, let me go to the closing remarks, and then we'll do the open discussion. I believe that a common democratic federal government can bring peace. We can do online election. It's feasible, and it can be held securely. 1 week of war between Israel and Gaza cost over $3 billion. The current governments of Israel and Palestine are not legitimate government in the area because they are not elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. If this thing is created, it will be the only legitimate government in that area, and we will be able to create democracy and could bring peace. Let me just show you one more thing before we go to open discussion. These are the things that we can buy for $100 million, or we can buy peace for the people of Israel and Palestine. So now I'm going to go to open discussion and have Professor make her remarks. And then we'll have questions and answer. Professor, if you don't mind, before you make your, if you don't mind, I want to take a short break and I'll be right back.
Pretty good turnout today. Danny, did you ever get to ask your question? You see you still have your hand up.
No, this is a new hand. I think I did before. Yeah.
Okay. I'll tell Joseph when he comes back.
Thank you.
Maybe you can start asking the question.
You're in charge, Charles.
Only by default.
We're also meeting next week, correct?
Yes.
Because usually it's every 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, but then it's next
then-
week and then the
then it's-
next one.
And then it's not until the 7th of January.
Ah,
after
because
that.
of Chris. Oh, okay, because of the holidays. Okay.
I have a question too.
I think I'm one of the presenters next week. I should know, right?
Samir, when Joseph gets back, I'll make him aware that there's 2 hands.
All right.
I have a question too.
That's Peter?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Sorry about that.
Joseph, I don't know whether you want to take their questions now, but there's 3 people who wanted to ask a question. Danny, Samir, and Peter.
You ask me questions?
Or comments?
Oh, yeah, but let's have the professor first.
Oh, okay. Let's hold them
No, I
until
won't.
afterwards then.
Yeah, let's have the professor, Rebecca Ruth Gold, just give us your impression, your comments, etc., and then we'll go to open questions.
Of the whole,
Yeah, what you've seen, the whole shebang that was just played in front of you. And Professor, if you can just move your screen a little so we can
Is that
see
better?
your whole face, we don't see your chin.
Okay, how's that?
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think on its own terms, it's just kind of, the looking at it at taking it at face value. It has democratic principles are enshrined, the principle of equality is enshrined. So that's all, progress certainly over what we have. I guess the question is there are a lot of very powerful forces in the world that don't want this solution, that don't want peace, don't want equality, and they will do anything they can to stop that, so what's the protection mechanism for preventing those forces from silencing democratic mandate of the IPC? But I think, yeah, otherwise, and also I think there need to be powerful allies. I guess I'd put it that way. And the United States, I think for reasons that have been stated, does not have a good track record. So I don't know where those powerful allies are going to come from, how to find them, where are they going to be? But it's a great beginning.
Well, just to answer your question, when democracy was, before democracy started, we had a king. And when someone suggested the democracy, the same questions that you asked have come up at that time.
That's true.
The king is too powerful. He has horses. He has the economy. He has powerful allies. But it doesn't really have legitimacy. It doesn't have the interest of the people. And we should not be afraid of the king. We should be doing what's right for the people, not be afraid of the king. So if this thing is developed worldwide, we will have the power of legitimacy.
I think that's so. Yes, looking at it from the framework of the history of democracy, the framework of 300 years, there's absolutely makes a convincing case. But in between that period, in the 20th century, I would just give you the examples of Iran, which had a democratic. And it actually reminds me somehow this simulation of like what was going on in Iran in the 1950s. That was prevented from being realized, right? Also, another important example, the Congo, in the assassination of the democratically elected President Lumumba there. So, and then the creation, the Balfour Declaration, the whole history of non-democratic governance that has led to the creation of Israel itself. I think that's happened in between. But yes, I mean, if we look at it from the very long perspective, it's true that democracy has a lot more power than it did a few centuries ago. So that's true.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's go to questions. People want to ask you a question. Danny Abulawa.
Yeah. Hi. So I've got 2 questions, but my first one is, how can the IPC ensure that a minority don't veto legislation that's widely accepted? For example, in the simulation, how the Israeli Prime Minister vetoed the legislation about rebuilding because they didn't agree with the ceasefire element. So that's my first question, is how it's might be possible to do that. And then the second question is, more generally about the idea of the IPC, because it's been initiated and apologies, I don't really know in detail about the IPC, so this might be inaccurate, but my perception is that the IPC, this idea has been conceived by international actors. And so I'm wondering about the risks for this to be accepted by Israeli and Palestinian leaders because it's coming from an international actor.
So your first question is, how would we be able to put pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister to change his views? And the second question is kind of similar.
Actually, my first question isn't about changing the views necessarily, although I suppose that is politically ideal, but more that one person or a few people, you know, a minority of people can't stop something that the majority want to happen.
Well, it's kind of like my answer would be the same. It's basically, first of all, a lot of these legislations will be prepared in consultation and speaking with the Prime Minister and the President of Palestine ahead of time. But if need be, at the end of the day, it's a mechanism to put pressure on them against the people that they supposedly represent. I mean, look, in this area of Israel, Israel has a huge, huge problem. It controls Gaza. It doesn't have the means to resolve the question of Gaza. It doesn't have the legitimacy in Gaza. The people in Gaza are its enemies. It has a huge problem with southern Gaza. In my opinion, a rational prime minister would embrace this kind of solution rather than veto it. But there are no guarantees, but it's a way to put pressure on them because he can no longer say we are Israel versus Palestine. This is Israel versus Israel. These are the people of Israel themselves. And I think your second question was about, did we approach Israeli politicians or are they going to be in agreement with that or something of that nature?
Yeah, my second question was about how you get Palestinian and Israeli leaders to accept the idea of the IPC when it's coming from international actors.
They're not going to accept the idea of an IPC. The IPC is in competition with them. They are claiming, and they will continue to claim, that they are the best solution for Israel-Palestine. We are saying, no, you are not the solution. And this is why we are creating an independent, separate government that would compete with you. And
Joseph, I think her question is, how do you make this acceptable to the people on the ground, the common Palestinians and Israelis? Because it's seen as something initiated by, like, for example, like you and I who live in the diaspora versus people who live in the West Bank or in Haifa or Tel Aviv. Not the government.
Okay, but first of all, by showing them that their government failed to give them peace, by showing them that they have wars upon wars, years after year for 75 years.
May I jump in? This is connected to my question, which is, who is going to be the entity that's going to organize these elections and raise that money?
Our organization, the Israeli Palestinian Confederation.
Which is a nonprofit registered in California.
Correct.
So how is that going to happen on the ground?
The money will be spent to support the platform for an election. The money will be spent to support people to run for parliament and for president. The money will be spent to create explanations for the benefits of this government, to show the benefits
so
of
why,
this
why not collaborate with organizations in Palestine and Israel who are on the same page as this organization?
If there are governments in Israel, Palestine that are willing to collaborate with us to create an independent, separate government for the people of Israel and Palestine, of course, we will cooperate with them, but they'll have to accept our constitution. If they do not accept our constitution, we will not corroborate with them. Okay, let's go to Samir Twer. And then Sharon, and then Giacomo. Samir.
Okay, hi everybody. Yes. Okay, we talked about this point many times, but I'm gonna raise it again. The veto power. You have that in your constitution. You give the veto power to both parties. And now in this simulation, and when you came to the question of ceasefire, when you propose ceasefire, who veto that? Israel.
Correct.
So that means you said before, the reason that you put or you gave the veto power to both parties in your constitution is to please Israel or to make it accepted by Israel or
to be
whatever.
Accepted by the Israeli people, not by Israel, by the Israeli people.
Israeli people, Israeli government.
No,
when we say Israeli.
No.
Well, there is no, when you represent the people, when you say that both parties, you are acknowledging Israel, the Israeli government, not Israeli people. And when you have a prime minister, no, I'm sorry. No, you cannot change. You say Israeli people. What is Israeli people? Israeli people, they elect a prime minister. The Palestinian Authority, they have a president. You acknowledging these governments. So what you have in your constitution is very clear. You give veto powers to these governments. So we are talking about government. So in this way, for that reason, you said that because you want to please these governments, to agree to accept this. In reality, that is going to be the reason that nothing is going to work. Your IPC will never work because that's one proposal. You asked for the ceasefire, and the Israeli government, the prime minister, said no. So since he has the veto power, then nothing will happen. Then the war will continue. And the same thing, for other things. Even if this one now, we pass the ceasefire, anything to do with the occupation, the Israeli government or the Israeli prime minister will veto, will take advantage of that veto power and will veto everything. And nothing will happen, and the occupation will continue forever. So your IPC will never work as long as you have the veto power. No veto power. Take it out. That's if you want it to go. Otherwise, it will never go. And that's just one simple ceasefire. Ceasefire cannot go because of the veto power. Take the veto power, then everything will. That's my question.
Joseph, Joseph, can I step in? Joseph, can I step in to answer directly, Samir, because that was exactly my the subject of my intervention. So I'm taking off my hat as Israeli Prime Minister. I'm no longer the Israeli Prime Minister. Don't shoot me. So
well, it doesn't matter. I'm talking about Prime Minister, whether you represent or not. I'm talking about in real time Netanyahu.
All right, let's have
no. Yes. So the issue of veto, the veto is a very important instrument in this game because it is precisely because we have a veto power that the IPC can operate and make all the authorities in the area feel comfortable that that IPC does not pose a threat. At the same time, the veto is useful because it forces the IPC to stay, let's say, realistic. The IPC cannot, in practice, do things like promote peace negotiations between the Israeli prime minister and, I don't know, Hamas leaders or whoever else. But what they can do, and what has always happened in the past before this big crisis of today, that we have been adopting legislation on school curricula and airports and stuff like that. Much more basic stuff, and that's useful, and that creates confidence and bring people together. So that's why let's not lose sight of this. But the veto is important within this context.
All right.
All right. Well,
Let's go to the professor. You can jump in at any time to make your comments. You are our guest, so you have priority.
We jumped the queue on Sharon. She would be next if we
Okay, let's go to Sharon.
Hi, everyone. I don't know how many people here are living in Israel. I live here in Israel. I think you know that, Joseph, right?
Right.
I don't think the people who are from overseas here understand, both the Palestinians and the other people here understand that actually there's a lot of there's already work in Israel on you know that, Joseph. There's people in Israel who are carrying on Joseph Avisal's work in Israel, and they run like little they have little meetings sometimes, and they try to get more people involved, and they have parlor meetings. I mean, in other words, it's not like people in Israel don't know. So theoretically, it could gain momentum. I'm an Israeli person. I'm an Israeli voter. So, it's not like it's only being done overseas. There's lots and lots and lots of people in the peace camp here in Israel who know about these ideas and would like to see them succeed. As far as our government goes, well, obviously, we're working as hard as we can to bring the government down and bring a more normal government in. We're aware of, but I mean, it's kind of a hypothetical exercise, these simulations, but it's good for the dialogue, and maybe someday it could possibly work. There are other ideas around as well, but this is one of them. And I just want people to realize it's not only overseas. There's a lot of us in Israel that have known about IPC for many years and think it's possibly a workable thing. And we support it, and it's growing. It is growing. It's not too well known yet, but it's growing. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sharon. Let's go to General Prince, and then Shlomo, and then Sean, and then Todd. General Prince.
Sorry. Just pass me. Thank you.
Oh, pass you?
I'll pass.
Okay. Okay, let's go to Shlomo.
Very quickly, regarding the veto, we have to ask the question, what if we don't have the veto stuff? There is no clause about veto. And whatever we do, so what are the consequences of not having this veto? For example, they may argue that we are undermining, that this is not legal, that they could come to us with all kind of demands and maybe even legal stuff. What do you think? What if we really don't have this veto? It doesn't matter if the veto or not veto. We have our decisions and our concept and what need to be done. And so what do you think?
Well, I agree. I think that if we do not have a veto, the Israeli government will see us as a subversive organization trying to overturn the government of Israel. Furthermore, I don't think the people in Israel, we will not get the support of anyone or very, very few people in Israel if we are basically saying we want to create a different government that will replace. There's no other explanation. Replace the Israeli government. That would be a subversive organization as far as the Israeli government is concerned.
Well, I mean,
and we will not get support from the people of Israel and Palestine.
Well, I mean, what's the purpose of the IPC? I mean, isn't that to replace the Israeli government and the Palestinian government? Isn't that what it is?
No, that's not what it is. That's absolutely what it's not.
Well, then what is it? What's the purpose of IPC?
The IPC is a separate independent government for the people of Israel and Palestine.
For what?
I'm sorry?
To do what?
To make peace.
How you make peace?
We just went through a simulation. We are basically saying that we can pass legislation that would put the Israeli and the Palestinian government in a predicament that they will have to support, because we are showing them that there is a way that would be acceptable to both sides without undermining their legitimacy, without undermining their government.
Well, then simply, I mean, the Israel will say, okay, thank you very much. Everything you propose, we reject. That's it.
Well,
they have the veto power and they can do whatever. So
I agree
your
with you.
project is nothing. I mean, it doesn't mean anything.
If we have 5 million people voting, then it will be very difficult for them to dismiss us outright. That's the point.
Well,
but we are beating a dead horse. Let's go
right.
to Sean.
Yeah, yes, Samir, I understand. You know what? If Israel keeps vetoing everything the IPC proposed, but you know what? It will expose the prime minister of what he really is, that he's not looking forward to peace. And we've created exposure to that prime minister, so that way people will think to remove him from his position and replace him with somebody else who's going to cooperate with IPC. And that's the best way we could do it so far. And the second thing I want to ask you, Joseph, you know what? Lately, on social media, I'm hearing some Zionism are trying to shut down people who are advocating for Palestinian or promoting, like wanting to have a ceasefire, and like some people are like that one person in CTV News who have been removed from her position because she was supporting Palestinian. And and I think Zionism are trying to put pressure on social media to shut down anybody who advocate for Palestinian. And I think right now, even with the IPC, that we're advocating for a ceasefire. So the Zionists will come and say to tell Zoom to shut down the IPC because they're advocating for a ceasefire. They don't like anything critical of Israel. They don't like anything to put pressure on Israel. So I'm and even for you, I think they're going to attack you too and tell you that you are some.
They have.
They also have attacked me. The whole peace camp in Israel, the whole left is under attack all the time, but we're continuing and we're not giving up and we're growing. And I think we're growing. I'm not sure, but we're.
So what's your question, Sean?
Well, my question is, do you think we will be removed from the stimulation? And because how like as much as they try to bribe politicians, as much as they try to shut down anybody critical of Israel, like with that extra pressure, how we can manage this this thing from Zionism when they can do all this to attack us or attack anybody on the media who are trying to say something different than what they want to hear.
Well, I actually think that Israel is now facing enormous challenges with Gaza, with Southern Israel, with the West Bank, and internally in Israel. And I think that very, very soon, and by the way, Samir said that before, very soon they will be looking for a solution to save themselves. They're not, they are now still at the stage of being arrogant and feeling very confident, but a lot of it is show, in my opinion. Reality is going to hit very soon and very hard, and they will look for a solution. They will look for a way out, including Netanyahu himself, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, because he's already promoting these right-wing extremists like Lieberman or this other guy, Shaktor, whatever, the guy who said let's build more settlements in the West Bank. He's doing all that. Like, it's already shown that this guy is going to a dead end.
He is. He's on his way. Smotrich, he's on his way out, believe me. And Ben Gvir's on his way out. And certainly Netanyahu's on his way out. For sure. Don't worry about that. They're definitely on their way out.
Okay, let's go to Todd.
So I'm a retired Army JAG officer. And so I've had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out why it is the American people were so readily brought into a torture program, et cetera. So I've done a lot of research and studied political theory for a master's after I retired. Anyway, the bottom line is I just posted a link in the chat about cognitive warfare. And there's a book out by somebody from the Ministry of Strategic Affairs in Israel about low intensity conflict and the battle for consciousness. My point being is that's the real war taking place, the battle for consciousness. I've got this book I just got the other day. I'm reading it, and I recommend everybody look up National Conservatism and Yoram Hazony, who is a genuine fascist movement and a continuation of Kahana. And of course, that's written quite a bit about the influence of Kahanism now in Israel. The point being is we've got a genuine fascist movement within Israel and the United States working together. And so I think this is a very important project because it helps in this consciousness, raising consciousness, talking to people, dialogue, that world can be different. We can change it. The opposite side of it was, like Yoram Hazony talks about, was how Ben Gurion and Jabotinsky did the same 100 years ago with the Jewish consciousness to turn it into much more militaristic, fascistic consciousness, which we are seeing today. So the point being, it's a battle for consciousness in Israeli terms themselves and NATO terms, and we're part of that on the right side. But we have to oppose the other side. Otherwise, we lose by default. And so this is important, but we also have to be able to name, identify who the enemy is. I'll use the term enemy as they do, but we're up against a very fascistic movement here. And make no mistake about that, they're going back to going back before the Enlightenment as what we should be pursuing now for legality, et cetera. I'll stop there, but this is important for that reason. It's part of this counter battle for consciousness. And if we can reach enough people, we can change things, but that's a big if, of course.
Yeah, we're not trying to change things by identifying enemies. We are trying to change things by identifying a solution.
And each for their own purpose. But for myself, I mean, talk about Smotrich and Gavir and Netanyahu. I mean, they are the fascists we're up against, as are Trump, DeSantis, and these other extreme right-wing American zealots for Israel too. And unless we recognize what they're up to, how can we rebut them? I guess is my point, which may not be the purpose of this issue with what you're doing, but still, we need to have it in our minds, understanding that these are some serious people who are doing everything they can to suppress peace and even democracy.
Okay, thanks. But you know, both Trump and Biden are not really supporters of peace.
Absolutely, but and I just seeing it by knowing the Overton window. So there's a dynamic in politics. As far right wing as Trump took us, I mean, remember Golan Heights and the embassy moved, et cetera, you know, and then in the Overton window sort of thing, it just moved everything to the right. So here comes the Democrats just a half step behind them. And Biden, and of course Biden was always a what I call a Goldwater Democrat, the most militaristic form of Democrat, and so we have him there now, only a half step behind DeSantis and Trump, who would give Netanyahu everything he asks for,
and more,
exactly.
Let's go to Charles, and then Nasir, and Professor, I don't hear you, but you're welcome to make your comments anytime. Charles.
Okay. Well, actually, I'm on 2 here, so let me mute this one. Okay. Yeah, we're in a very difficult situation right now because both. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Because both the United States and Israel, which has depended for the approval from the United States from its very inception and every moment in between in their decision making about what they can get away with the Palestinians. And I've always been of the perspective that, as Martin Luther King said, you know, an injustice to anyone anywhere is an injustice to everyone everywhere. And if you tolerate fascism in one little pocket of the world, it's going to grow. And so we are facing an authoritarian in the United States, an authoritarian fascist on the one hand, and somebody that I would call a neoliberal supporter of fascism on the other hand. It's not a good mix. But the good news is, they have in mainstream media, they can lock it down. They can do their psyops on everybody and try and convince them that Israel's defending themselves, et cetera, forever. But they're losing the next generation. They're totally losing it. On social media, there's a tag, support Israel, that has like 450,000 followers. The one that says supports Palestine has over 25 million followers. And everywhere on various social media blurbs here and there, popping up all over the place, they're making fun of Israeli propaganda, and they're talking about what's really going on. So there is, I think, this chance that Samir makes these comments like, Israel can veto everything and that's the end of the story. Fascist governments are very weak. Their only strength is this paper tiger image of who they are and what they represent in terms of safety and security, and they always have to have a big enemy out there to blow themselves up. And that whole thing is crumbling right now. It's crumbling for Israel. It's also crumbling, I believe, for the United States, if we can just avoid going authoritarian. We could be looking at some better days ahead. But there is work involved. So yeah, and my hat's off to I'm not getting your name because it dropped off the bottom of the screen. Person who was just speaking from Israel, Dorothy. Anyway.
Sharon?
Sharon. Yeah,
Sharon
right. Yeah, great. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to Nasir, and then to Shlomo, and then to Sharon.
I came a little bit late, but I wanted to ask this question of Professor Rebecca Gold and get her opinion. It's I get what Charles is saying about how Israel right now and is a fascist government looks weak, and what Sharon was saying earlier. But the fact is, this government has maintained its power and its position mainly because there's a large public sector that supports war and the policy that they're doing. And unfortunately but let's look at the United States. We're at a crossroad here. 80% of Democrats support a ceasefire. And I think it's something like almost 60% of Americans in general. So even in the Republican Party, I believe it's like 49% or something like that. Yet the UN vote for a ceasefire was vetoed. And I think if you go to Congress, 11% of the Congress supports ceasefire. And the rest are giving Israel basically a blank check to wage war, and they're supplying weapons. And this support from the United States is absolutely essential for Israel and allowing Israel to do what it's doing right now in Gaza. And it's so out of touch with the people. And I think that we have to ask ourselves as activists, as people who support peace, what's the next step? How do we overcome this big obstacle, which is the power in Washington that is blind? I mean, look what happened in France. France was so pro-Israel, but the protests in France put pressure, and Macron right now is singing a different song, and he's changing. In England, you can see it a little bit, not as much. And of course, Germany, you're not going to hear it because of the whole history they have with anti-Semitism and Israel. But in the United States, this has got to be the main focus, because literally, the Congress is so much at odds. And I think the Democrats this election season, they're really going to pay the price for this. And there's going to be so much hate for Israel, because Israel literally is bringing doom to the progressive movement in the United States, because they've literally hijacked the Congress. They've hijacked this for them. And look at the professor. It was Liz McGill. For when they asked her, just for example, I support the Intifada, because Intifada to me is resistance against occupation. But the Congress is calling it, that's it, saying that I support global Intifada is genocide. It's calling for the genocide of the Jews. It's ridiculous. This has gone completely out of control. The tone, the voices calling for Palestinian rights is associated with genocide. And so this bridge that needs to be crossed is what my question is. Like, how are we going to get this? Because it seems like we're so close, but we're so far.
Great. I'm happy to respond, or does someone else want to speak first?
No, please do respond, because that was really addressed toward you. And I'm by the way, you're a professor at my alma mater. From the California campus. At the time, it wasn't Middlebury, but it's Middlebury now. So we're from the same place.
Awesome. Okay, that's great to hear. Yeah, no, I think you made a number of really important points, which is why I really wish we could take just kind of focus on what Israelis want and Palestinians want. But I don't think in this specific situation, as you mentioned, America is the deal breaker. It decides things for better, usually for worse. But we can't ignore America as a political actor here. And I think all of the points you made are very valid. And I would just say, unfortunately, there's not like a single thing we can do to change things immediately, but I think there are specific strategies. So I would say, we should, as terrible as they are, we cannot give up on our elected representatives, because at the end of the day, they do want to win their elections, right? And it's very hard, because I'm contacting, I have two senators. Oregon is where I have my senators, and one of them was actually the second person to support a ceasefire, and I and my family actually lobbied him, and the next day he actually came out with a ceasefire. I don't say that's just because of me, but I mean, I think that the impact of local constituents did make a difference. The other one hasn't moved yet, but I think that's we just have to continue, and not realize that it's going to be very frustrating to try to speak to representatives who are usually very concerned with AIPAC and the pro-Israeli narrative. Just continue to persist and remember that it is a matter of winning or losing the elections. I mean, there are just lots of small strategies. Another very kind of actually makes a difference is writing letters to your local newspaper, because that's to kind of get the grassroots, aware and motivated, especially people. Those are the people who can be won over, and that's also where the elected representatives look, to kind of gauge the political mood of their constituents. So I think that actually these aren't kind of exciting, glamorous things, but I think they really make a difference. And then I think the other point that should be made is that again, to American voters who are often, for understandable reasons, they're thinking about their health care, they're thinking about domestic politics. But we should remember that the money that's going to fund this war, the money that U.S. taxpayers pay, could be used for domestic U.S. services, right? So we should be encouraging fellow American citizens to think of this as a domestic issue that is taking away from the resources that the American government has to help Americans who are in poverty, who need healthcare, and so forth. So I mean, those are the some strategies I would recommend. I actually have, I don't know if you use medium.com, but I have a post up a couple of days ago that's actually got a lot of traction about very, very kind of specific, non-glamorous ways of impacting our elected representatives. And actually, one more thing I want to mention is that there is a new bill that the U.S. Senate has put forward. It's been so far endorsed by 12 senators. I could direct you to my Twitter account, because I posted about it there, but maybe if you Google, you'll find it. 12 senators have supported it, and they have basically said that it said that any foreign military aid needs to pass a human rights vetting process, and the president needs to report on the use of those weapons twice every year. So it puts such a welcome and necessary barrier and vetting process on the passage of U.S. military aid to Israel that it actually, the reality is that even if the Biden's request for other bill also goes through, it will be very, very difficult for him to get those weapons to Israel because of the human rights vetting process that's embedded in it. So I would say you should absolutely pressure your senators to endorse this new bill. And I think it has a good chance of getting a lot of momentum, because 12 senators have already supported it. So these kinds of things do make a difference. And even if it doesn't pass, it will be a way of signaling to Israel, that the more they continue to wage this war on Gaza, the less support they're going to get from the United States.
I posted your Twitter account as well as the link to that. I believe you're referring to Chris Van Hollen.
Exactly. Okay, I have a link there, and I encourage you to reach out to your senators.
I just put it in the chat if anyone wants to see it as well. Thank you for the response. And
I have a question to ask Nasir.
Sure.
Nasir, if we are able to meet all of these elements that are in the assumptions, Okay, you remember those assumptions?
The assumptions for the Confederation?
Yes. Okay, if we are able to have 5
verbatim.
million people vote and we have 300 parliament members and a president, in your opinion, what would be the sentiments
To be
within,
honest,
within the American public opinion, or for that matter, the European public opinion or the world public opinion?
to be honest with you, I think that the American, the European, and even the Palestinians are open to anything right now because the situation is so bad. The problem is the Israeli public. The Israeli public.
But that's not my question. My asking, what would be the what would be the response? What would be the sentiments?
The sentiments, I say, would be very open because I think that they're willing to accept anything that appears to make the situation better. They really want something. And again, and so I would say they'd be open to it. But again, the problem is the two people, Israel and the United States. If you don't have Israel and the United States on board, and it's very unfortunate because, like, look at the last 5 elections in Israel. The last 5 elections in Israel, the Palestinian issue wasn't even mentioned, even by Meretz. And it took October 7th. It took an attack that killed 1,194 Israeli citizens to now make it an issue for Israelis.
Correct. All right, let's go to Shlomo, then Sharon, then Samir.
Quick question to Rebecca. Why, in your opinion, what is in the mind of the United States? I'm not necessarily Biden, because Biden is a puppet, but still, what is really going on? Why do they encourage a genocide, daily genocide? There is a plan. What is the plan, in your opinion, in this chess game, big chess game? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I've often asked myself that as well. I think you have to really understand it in the context of the Middle East in general. I mean, look at the governments that the U.S. has supported around Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran. There is a tendency to support autocracy, right, in the Middle East. It's not just Israel, it's a general issue. And I think for better or worse, a lot of that has to do with oil and access to various issues that benefit the U.S. economy. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the long history shows. It's not necessarily the only consideration, but when that's kind of the dominant economic model where the U.S. profits the more that it controls the flow of oil in that region, then everything else kind of falls into place, right? So whatever lobby organizations are that want to support the Israeli policy, they can kind of put themselves in line with that. And it's a very well-established American tradition, unfortunately, not to support. And before that was the British, right? Also had a similar policy of kind of wanting to control the Middle East. And so, yeah, it's a very long history and it needs to break. But yeah, Biden doesn't seem to be the person to do it.
But one little question beyond it. So where does it lead? Because it may lead to a war with Iran, which becomes a world war. And pretty dangerous. And maybe another motivation on the United States is their old dream to invade and take Iran and the oil. And so all of this is pretty scary. Yeah.
It's certainly that has been, I think, again, it's, not necessarily everyone in the U.S. government, but that's certainly an aim of, some U.S. political leaders. I think as someone who I work both on Palestine and Iran, so I can comment on that a little bit. I think that, as much as authoritarian and even totalitarian as the current Islamic Republic is, I think they don't want war because that would be the end of them, And so I think in a sense, their kind of selfishness, and we've seen that actually in terms of their response, the way that they've spoken about Hamas and they're sort of warning, Hamas not to expect any help. So that kind of the selfishness of the Islamic Republic, and that they're totally happy to repress their own citizens, but they want to stay in power. So I think fingers crossed, that there's not going. War seems to be a pretty unlikely outcome because it doesn't serve their interests. But on the other hand, I think that's kind of where it could definitely go if the U.S. doesn't stop the war, doesn't stop vetoing a ceasefire in the UN.
All right, let's go to Sharon and then Samir. Sharon.
Okay, hi. I want to, first of all, I want to tell Nasir that, I agree with almost everything you said. Also, I want to have some reply to Charles Fredericks. And also
Charles
Professor
Fredericks.
Gould. I think a lot of what you said is correct, of course, as well. Nasir, somebody said, Charles Fredericks said that, fascist governments are very weak and this and that. But I don't want everybody to turn against Israel. I live here and I care about Israel and all that. But you have to understand that, and I don't know if everybody understands this, there's the whole religious element. There's a huge religious population. I'm talking the Jewish religious population in Israel. They're pretty strong. They're multiplied much faster than the secular population. And, they just see as, I'm not defending them. I'm really not. I'm definitely not. But there's like pressure on the Israeli government to, do the things that they want to do, which is to continue build settlements in the West Bank, etc. And they really believe that they're right. This is the land that God gave the Jews, and that's what we have to do. And they just don't hear they don't hear normal, rational thought. So that's one thing, in my opinion. About the U.S. support, I think a lot of Israelis, I'm very aware of the fact that if the USA cuts off aid to Israel, the army cannot continue. No way. There's no way. Anyone who doesn't want to hear that is living in a la-la land, because we know damn well that we need those planes, those F-16s, those F-15s, all those weapon systems, etc., and the aircraft carriers sitting in the Mediterranean. I believe, I'm not sure because I'm not in the United States, I haven't lived there for many years, but my feeling is that it's only Biden. It's people ask, why is the US, not vetoing the ceasefire? I think it's only President Biden, and he's not going to be there for too much longer. And smart Israelis realize that US support is not going to be there forever at all. Financial aid is not going to, in the huge sums that it has been, is not going to be there forever. And therefore, Israel has to start moving toward some sort of, let's call it, solution to the conflict, or political solution. I think there's already tremendous pressure on Israel. I think everybody who said that is right. And I just think it's Biden. And I guess that maybe the pro-Israel lobby that so far have been managed to sort of hang on. But I realize it's going to change. I feel it. I feel the sentiment in the United States going against us, not to mention France, UK, etc. Believe me, we know that. And I hope Israel gets smart fast enough to take the steps it should take. I also would like a ceasefire today. I'm not in support of the destruction Israel's doing, but of course here in Israel, I can't say that. People will jump on me. I have to be very careful about, but we have, within our own left-wing groups, we get together, we demonstrate, we call for a norm. But another thing I want to say is that, well, just Nasir, you're right about everything you said.
If I have just 5 seconds, sorry, Samir, just to reply, because what you said, Sharon, is I absolutely agree with about the U.S. facilitating with the weapons and the money for war. But I'll even go take it a step further. Settlements without subsidies, settlements cannot exist. If they did so, in a sense, the enabling of Israel's army, as well as the settler movement, is coming from external forces such as the Israeli government, such as money from abroad. And if these subsidies, it's like, for example, there was a debate in England with Mahdi Hassan and Norman Finkelstein back, I believe, in 2014. We know what the problem is. We know what the solution is, but there's no will. And if these tough love measures are not taken, where United States politicians say that, hey, we're not going to subsidize these settlements, we're not going to subsidize these wars that you have, everything, I think Bernie Sanders said it in his speech, even food stamps. When we give food stamps to poor people, there's conditions. You can't buy liquor, you can't buy dope, you can't buy, medicine. You have to use it for food. And there is this tough love. And I think that it's not just for the army, but it's also for the settlements. Settlers want to live in the West Bank? Okay, pay for it. Defend yourselves.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I
pay for your electricity.
Tough love. I agree.
Before I let Samir ask a question, I want to disagree with you, Sharon. I'm sorry to do that. And the U.S. is going to continue to support Israel. The U.S. has been supporting Israel for a long time. And it doesn't matter who the president is, it will continue to support Israel. One reason is because
of Congress.
I'm sorry?
Because of Congress. The Congress is supporting Israel. So,
Congress is supporting Israel, but even from a practical, analytical point of view, Israel is a powerful country. It can inflict harm on the whole area. It has nuclear weapons, multiple nuclear weapons. The US is concerned about one thing and one thing only, and that is stability in the Middle East. You've seen Netanyahu thumbs his nose at Obama. Before that, we saw the Israeli Prime Minister thumb his nose at Bush. In my opinion, in the relationship between Israel and America, Israel is has the stronger hand because it can do whatever it wants, and it knows that the US will eventually have no choice but to support it. And because the US wants stability. Now imagine that that Israel is not going to get a single aid from the United States. What's going to happen? It's going to go somewhere else. It's going to go to Russia. It's going to go to China. It's going to. So the U.S. is aware of all of that. It knows that you really you have no choice but to support Israel. It's not because of ideological reason. It's because the U.S. has no choice. And that's why we see Netanyahu continuously embarrass the U.S. presidents, go around them and act as if he is part of the Republican Party. So let's go to Nasir.
no, to me.
No, I think it's to Samir, but
I'm sorry, to Samir. Yeah.
But again, I don't think Sharon or I are advocating totally cutting them off and throw them to the wolves, but put strings, just like we put strings on conditions of aid to Egypt, just aid to the Ukraine. Ukrainians are not given weapons and said, hey, kill whoever you want. They have conditions.
Look at reality. The U.S. has more interest in giving than Israel has in receiving, in my opinion. But look at reality. The reality is that it is constantly giving regardless of what Israel does. So you have to wonder about that. I don't think it's the personal love that the president has for Israel. It's in the interest of the United States because it has no other choice to continue. And I don't want to use the word support because I don't think giving arms is support. It's continue to give aid to Israel and continue this war and continue Israel's policy because the United States has no other choice, basically.
Okay, now my turn.
Yes, Samir.
All right. Well, let us see what's happening now in Israel, Palestine. What they are talking about. What they are talking about right now, they want to dismantle Hamas. And they want to reoccupy Gaza and control Gaza. That's what they want. Okay.
Correct.
So, in this way, what is our answer here? I mean, we should be calling right now for also dismantle apartheid Israel. As long as, okay, you want to dismantle Hamas, fine. You want to reoccupy Gaza and control it, fine. But at the same time, that apartheid Israel has to be dismantled. And we call for one secular democratic state. That's about it. I mean, there is no way around it. I mean, they want to do.
Samir, I did call for the end of Zionism and the end of the idea of a Jewish state because it is harming the Jewish people and the. But
yes. Well, we have to continue doing that. That's our demand right now and forever.
You get more resistance.
Dismantle apartheid Israel. The Jewish state is bad for Jews, and Zionism is not gonna be working for the benefit of the Jews in general.
I agree.
And the only solution and the best solution is one democratic state. That's it. One secular democratic state. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, it may come to that.
Let Sharon answer.
All right, let's go back to Una and then Charles and then Sharon again. Oh, General, do you want to speak?
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I just had a question for Nasir. I think I heard him say that the one-state solution has some problems. What are the problems with a one-state solution in your opinion, Nasir?
Nasir.
That's a question for Nasir.
Okay, but that's not fair. That's giving Nasir another opportunity to speak. Let's go to Una.
Okay, just a quickie. I'm going to ask you very, very stupid questions. Why are the settlers still allowed to move to Israel? That is making the problem worse. For I'm totally bemused and totally, I don't understand. For Israel wants peace, do they? Therefore, why do they allow the settlers to come back? They come from the state, they stay in the state. I mean, Jewish is a religion. Why should they go to Israel and become, I found it totally in my very silly head. I can't understand. Please explain.
Okay, I'll explain to you.
What you talking about? The right of return, the Jews, are you referring to the right of return of the Jews? Is that what you're referring to, Una?
Yeah.
That we allowed Jews to come?
Yes.
Wait, can I answer? First of all, the Jewish is not just a religion; it's a nation. 5,000 years ago, we had a king, we had an army, and we always had a land until 80, I think it was 80 CE when the Romans threw us out. So first of all, we're not just a religion like Christianity, Islam, Buddhism. We're a nation, and that's how we view ourselves. Okay, first of all, and as far as why. That's an Israeli, I'm not saying it's a good policy but that's the Israeli government policy. It's a problematic policy, I agree. But that's who's been in power in Israel. They want as many Jewish immigrants to come to Israel to keep the nation strong, to have more and more soldiers because we keep losing soldiers and we need, people. And that's just the way it is. You want to come to Israel, but you're not, and vote with me in the peace camp and get rid of this idiotic government that we have.
But look, if you were Netanyahu, you would want as many potential settlers to come over as possible.
No, for sure not. I would like to dismantle all the settlements tomorrow.
I know, but I said if you were Netanyahu, if you were the right-wing government in Israel, you would want as many potential settlers to come into Israel as possible.
Well, yeah, sort of. Netanyahu has his hands tied by very strong religious parties, and and he's to stay in power so that he doesn't get, go to trial and get thrown in jail. He will do anything for the religious parties. It's very complicated, but yeah, I don't think that, Netanyahu himself is not a religious man, and I don't think he believes so much in, the need to build settlements, but he's just like a puppet. He's weak. He's ridiculous, unfortunately.
All right, let's go to Charles and then Shlomo, and then I think we'll give the professor the last word, and then we'll conclude.
It's sad that the spiritual metaphysical aspect of a human being is so often co-opted for political reasons, but there's not a nationalistic or fascist or however you want to define it movement that doesn't make use of that. You're talking about the Russian Orthodox Church being reborn in Russia with Putin, and Hungary, the United States, what's separation of church and state? What's that? No, our founding fathers were all Christians, it's very dangerous, and it's obviously operative in overcoming Israeli politics at the moment. I don't know how. I recognize what you're saying. It's like you try to talk rationally to somebody to say that, well, we're all human beings, it just bounces off. But I don't know what else to do except to keep moving for, because I see these other ideologies as being fraudulent. And when they're put into practice, they create horrible problems and they're constantly in a state of failing. I don't see any other possibility except for, you know, standing foursquare for what we feel is the righteous principles of acknowledging each other as human beings and moving for that to be instituted in our political structures. Anything else, at the end of the day, we are natural beings subject to the dictates of nature. And all these kind of, you know, different ways in which we define ourselves other than that, they get in the way of taking care of what's real. And hopefully we can sort it out. That's all I want to say.
All right, Shlomo. We'll conclude with Shlomo and the professor.
Very quickly to Una, Israel is not interested in peace, Israel is interested in land, period. And that's why they want the settlers to take as much land as possible and to basically expel whoever is there. To Sharon, Biden is just a puppet. And in fact, if you really understand American politics, it all go back to Eisenhower, who warned the American people against the military-industrial complex. Now it is military, industrial, and oil, and especially security. There are deep and very strong connections between the deep state in the United States and the deep state in Israel, the Mossad, etc., and the CIA here. So that makes it much more complex. Just just a little bit to give you a taste of it. And I will stop here.
All right. Professor Gold, do you have concluding remarks?
Well, I think I should add on a positive note. I'll try. Yeah, I think obviously, I mean, the challenges that we're discussing are very formidable, and maybe the reference has been made to the kind of the resistance that comes from advocates of Israel and lobby groups that try to undermine activism for peace. So I guess in that context, I myself, obviously can get very discouraged by the enormity of the task that faces us. I would just point out that, it's compared to the people in Gaza right now, this is what we're facing can be endured, and I think we just need to persist and yeah, I mean, the forum like these that allow us to share our views, which are diverse and not necessarily aligned in every detail, that makes us stronger. And we just increase these conversations and don't allow ourselves to be intimidated.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you for joining. I know your time is very valuable. And thank you all for joining. And we'll see you next week, next Sunday.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.